Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to everyone. The panel is very well set. Over the last 4 years or so, each month, India has minted a dollar billionaire. And this is against the backdrop of consistent news items which talk about 80 crore people not being able to afford 2 or 3 decent meals a day. With this background, ladies and gentlemen, let's discuss what prosperity means for a country like us. We are 150 crore people growing rapidly, both in terms of income as well as aspirations. I'll start with you, Namita, first. 20,000 crores as market capitalization, 70% owned by you at Emcure Pharma. How do you define prosperity for yourself? And how do you see it for your employees and the wider public at large?
I think I'll quickly divide the question in 3 parts, for me, for the company, and maybe the country. For me, it is if I can sleep with peace of mind, if you have just basics sorted out in your life, it's a miracle what a little bit of money and a little bit of silence and goodness and integrity can do when you sleep at night. You sleep well. For the company, I think it's creating shareholder valuation, because that's what we get paid for. So at the end of the day, you can talk all you want, but if your numbers are not there, and if your share price and that retail investor is not happy, it means nothing. So for me, that's prosperity for the company. And for the country, long way to go. So I think the 3 or 4 themes that I really am, it saddens me that a lot needs to be done is inequality in wealth, which keeps getting worse by the day in this country. Education gaps, Anu Auntie is a dear friend and she's doing a lot of work with Teach for India, but the education gap is just terrible. There's 60% people who are not even educated beyond secondary. The third area I would say, because I'm from pharmaceuticals, is it's a sick nation. If you see the 3 A's, the access, awareness, affordability, it's a terrible state of affairs. The NCDs, the non-communicable diseases, is getting worse by the day. So I think there are a lot of these basics that we need to cover if we really want to call ourselves a prosperous nation. Otherwise, it's just all talk.
Okay, fine. Let's expand this discussion and get Sanjeev, Krishan into this. You've, sir, over the last 3 decades or so, chronicled how India has changed dramatically, whether it's in the C-suite or the broader economy, as also so many other changes that we've seen over the last 25 years or so. What, according to you, needs to be done? What is the focus that the government should have? How about corporates, and what about individuals? Can we do something?
Yeah, well, of course. There's a lot, to be honest. I think as Namita just said, we celebrate our demographics, but education and healthcare are 2 biggest areas which can lift this demographic profile and get it more productive. And I think that's one of the biggest thing to my mind. I think as Namita said, and I cannot agree more, there's a lot to be done. I think for many years, since you said the last 30 years, ever since we globalized, if I may, I think we have taken a long time to appreciate that big can also be good. I think for the longest time we used to celebrate that small is better. I think it's taken us a long time, and when we compare ourselves with our eastern neighbor, I think the message is very, very clear. I mean, I just saw on social media this morning BYD's new factory, which is coming along, which apparently is going to be as large as San Francisco. So the fact that big can also be good, and it can create certain efficiencies, is something that we have taken a long time. So now there are a lot of incentivization, etc., which is there through PLI schemes, etc. I think unequal outcomes so far. We'll see as to, the jury is out on it. But I think we've taken a long time. And I think the third one, which I'll say to begin with, when you look at the broader ecosystem at this point in time, we have to create capability just by giving, as I would say, just by giving doles or money so that people can get through the short term, which is important, by the way. I'm not saying that because only when you get through the short term can you create long term, but just by putting a little bit more money in the hands of the people without creating their ability to sustain themselves over long periods of time, I think that may be a bit myopic.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to do a very small exercise on your mobile handsets. Search Mathew Cyriac and latest shareholdings. Wa- One of the best, one of the biggest beneficiaries of this lovely market rally that we've seen over the last 5 years have been investors such as Mathew and the broad cross-section of people who've made sensible money in markets by investing wisely. What, according to you, Mathew, is the right definition of prosperity? Apparently, in this August audience, you are the best person to answer how to be prosperous from now on.
I don't think so. I am a salaried employee, just left my firm and started a investing business 7 years back or 8 years back now.
And done immensely well.
Yes. So, I had a very unique thought at that point in time, which didn't work out, by the way. I was in private equity and I was quite enamored by public markets. And I said, if you could put together a fund that could invest both in private markets and public, that'll be a great kind of a offering, because there are times when public markets are down, so that you should be able to deploy there. When there are times when, the privates that you invest, markets are roaring, you should be selling. That was the broad concept, but it didn't take off. So my mentor, and he was also a professor, mentor, and also a boss, said, Mathew, you're wasting your time trying to raise a fund. Why don't you put whatever little money you have and start? And this is the time I left Blackstone, and Blackstone offered me to, buy some of the deals that had not worked out. So one of the companies was Gokuldas Exports, which, obviously the firm had worked at it for 10 years. It didn't, it was almost close to bankruptcy. It had 450 crores of debt. It had 30,000 people. And I'm not saying this for the sake of it. I said, this company, if it goes down, it is 30,000 people, which means another 120,000 people. And I said, if there is a way that I can do something, and obviously I managed to get a good deal. This is 2017. We managed to get an excellent CEO to come in and run it. And I give him all the credit. And the business has grown 4 or 5 times from there, highly profitable. Now we have close to 60,000 employees, right? To me, that is prosperity, because 85% of the employees are women employees, right, who are at the bottom of the pyramid, who typically, from a social perspective, probably have a drunk husband, or probably a husband who has left the wife and the kids. And, the money put in the hands of those women, that creates a different level of prosperity and impact, from a society, from an education. So that's prosperity to me. I mean, that's one of my, kind of most cherished moments, the success of Gokuldas.
Okay. So, would you like to add something here, ma'am? You also have a listed company, and of course, you are a very busy investor these days. How do you see prosperity across India when you look at, young ones coming with good business plans which require decent funding, and some of them really do immensely well? How has this prosperity changed, this access to capital that we have now in the last 3 or 4 years?
I think what Mathew said is fabulous. Creating jobs is one of the best metrics of prosperity. So like he said, 30,000 employees, 120,000 lives impacted, and then now that going to 60,000 from 30,000. So I think that's a huge metric, and what better example than startups. So I'm very proud to be part of Shark Tank India. It takes 20 days of mine a year, so not a whole lot of time, mostly weekends. Of course, they kill us with 15 hours a day shoot. That's a different story. But if you look at the numbers, in India, there are 120 unicorns, which have a combined market valuation of $350 billion. I think that's fantastic, right? In the last 1 year alone, if you see the PEVC funding, it's been about 14 billion. In the last 5 years, it's been 100 billion. So all this is what you would call risk capital, because a lot of these companies, 90% of companies that come to Shark Tank are pre-revenue. We're taking a bet on the industry, on the sector, on the founder. And I think that's what counts, that if more and more people are willing to take those educated and informed bets, that's a very clear path to job creation, which is very needed because, we all keep talking about demographic dividend, and it's a fact that there are 30 million SMEs. And again, I'm sorry, I'm a numbers person, so I tend to rattle numbers. But there are, you're talking about 2/3 of the population being under 35. So if there isn't that amount of job creation and reskilling, that has to go hand in hand, you're going to be in trouble, and there's no P of prosperity anywhere to be seen.
Sanjeev, when you look at the fact that job growth and salary growth has been stagnant in India, job growth and salary growth has been more or less stagnant at the entry level over the last 5 years. You have inflation that's almost troublesome. How do you look at prosperity from the point of view of people who are entering the job market, trying to set themselves up, and this is also an age of automation, age of artificial intelligence, where jobs are simply not there.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, I may not agree with what you said. I mean, salaries have been rising. I mean, in fact,
they haven't been rising as fast as profit growth.
Well, that may be true. That may be true. But let me just say that on India's demographics and Indian IT industry, I think we do see some pressures because the cost arbitrage continues to go down. And I would say that that's where the opportunity also is, and it is about skilling ourselves. You said about employment. One of the recent surveys that came across which said that in India, everybody who's employed, 1 out of 2 people is less skilled for the job they already have. And now in the mix is something like AI, etc., which has always been there, but now possibly has been manifesting a little bit more. So in a situation where we are already underskilled for the job we have, there is disruption, further technology disruption that has come in. I think the only thing that we need to be focused on at this point in time is how do we upskill ourselves and stay relevant. Again, Namita just said, I mean, look at the entrepreneurs, those 120 unicorns who have come along, right? I mean, there was something in them that they created, that a challenge that they took, an opportunity that they took, and they've created so much wealth. I'm sure that is one way to go. But for the population at large, who wish to just be working in what is India's strength, whether in factories or in capability centers, global capability centers that India is proud of having, I think the upskilling gap is the one missing. Let me also say that when we talk about something like semiconductors, for instance, we say that okay, we are not part of the value chain, but 25% of the design for chips actually happens in India.
And that's been happening for the last 3 decades.
It has been happening for a long time. But to sustain that, I think we need to focus on upskilling in a very different way, and I think that's where the whole focus on education, sharp education, has to be of a different magnitude.
Mathew, in your case, a lot of money was made because you had concentrated bets, and some of those bets were for a very long period of time. India is investing, and we are financializing our assets in the form of moving away from bank deposits, maybe towards markets. What would be your advice over the next 10 odd years that retailers can do to create, decent wealth by doing the least?
That's a tough one. I don't know. But see, when I look at the opportunities, I'll talk about myself, how I think about it. And I don't know exactly how retailers would be able to participate. If you really look at the investing landscape, I think technology and deep tech is going to be a big part of the value creation from here on. You have the traditional businesses, the brick and mortar businesses. You have the next level of, tech businesses in India, which are what I would call, they're all great businesses, but they are all business model plays, right? You have basically taken business models from different markets, whether it is fintech, consumer tech, services. All of that has been executed well for the Indian market, including our NPCI, the RuPay, and some of the products are essentially creating, the best business model for the Indian market. But I think if you fast forward, let's say 10 years from now, the incremental value created would be actually in deep tech and electronics and semiconductors. And I think, Sanjeev, you mentioned, I was talking to a partner of mine. The statistics are as follows. 30% of chip design talent is in US. 75% of the market value of chip companies are US companies. The second largest chip design capability is India, actually 20%. As you rightly said, Texas Instruments came here in 1980s, actually, 86. Yes. So it's almost 40 years. And every single chip company, semiconductor company, whether it is Japanese, European, US, if not the first concentration of talent outside their home market, is always India. In fact, for AMD, it's actually India, right? But we have not been able to take advantage of that. So I have this other partner with whom we put together a fund, and he's a very senior, technologist. This is like a year back, and he said, the biggest opportunity is India actually investing in deep tech. I'm not a deep tech person, I don't understand. I took it as an opportunity to learn, understand, and get along with it. So we launched this fund, and fund got done, and he was so right that we are seeing such opportunities, right? And by the way, this gentleman is the new Intel CEO, right? Lip-Bu Tan, right? So he saw this happening in China in 2000. He participated in a big way. He thinks the next real big value creation is going to be, it need not necessarily be semiconductor, but all type of deep tech opportunities. So that's what, I don't know whether, it may be a little bit early for retail investors, but yes, over a period of time, that's an area which one should focus on. That is an area which will create actually prosperity for India, right? Because actually if you look at, if you read things like the chip wars, from a national security, from a, defense, semiconductor is the core of it. Yes. What was software 20 years back, and that was our first prosperity, kind of first phase for India, right? It's kind of played out, 25 years. I think the next phase of prosperity is going to come from deep tech. That's my view on, where to focus on.
Okay. Namita, you have a manufacturing background, and all of us know that India is the pharmacy of the world. Of course, the Chinese proliferate as far as manufacturing is concerned, but whatever goes inside is made in India as far as medicines are concerned. When you look at from the corporate boardroom point of view, how do you expect the government of India to sort of create a level playing field when it comes to expanding manufacturing and maybe, a trickle down impact which will have on prosperity?
So the PLI obviously was a step in the right direction. But there was always this anticipation of China plus one.
Yes.
And it's most relevant for pharma, right? Because all our API, we're still heavily dependent on China. And there were schemes and incentives to try to change that, but it's not really going to change in the near future, because there's such a huge gap between the cost at which India would make it, given the infrastructure, regulation, incentives, the overall ecosystem versus what you would get if you got the same API from China, that again, a lot of these things are great on paper, but the execution is far from where it needs to be. So that's a real challenge that I face in the boardroom, that the whole API is something that keeps me awake at night. That's a big challenge. The second part, of course, is, again, like I keep talking about he spoke about deep tech and AI, but there is a threat in terms of the jobs as well. So for us, we feel at some point the regulatory department, a large part of the R&D department will be substituted by AI. But then what happens to those jobs, right? So there are these genuine concerns. Sustainability, we didn't talk about that, but that whole area, that if you want to be globally competitive, that needs to be a big angle. That pharma, again, we're a little behind the curve, and we look at these issues, whether it is API, AI, sustainability, but we've not even scratched the surface in pharma. I think there are other industries which are way ahead of us.
Sanjeev, when you see states competing, you have many states now vying for that $1 trillion GDP that we talk about, and there has been this rollout on Ladli Behna schemes, which tries to sort of, somehow improve prosperity at the real basic level. How do you see these two things working in tandem with each other? States vying desperately to get companies such as Apple, companies such as BYD to set up factories at their end, and at the same time trying to sustain that bottom of the pyramid.
So I think it's, in my mind, it's going to be ease of doing business 2.0. I think in the budget this year, there's already been a remark about getting the states and center to work together. I think it's, when we go to places like Davos, etc., it's wonderful to see many states out there, Indian states, vying for investments and so on and so forth, but effectively replicating the same models, right? I mean, in some ways, people actually wonder as to why so many of them are there and why is there no centralized mechanism to do, to sort of gather investments in the country. So I think one is the coordination between the state and the center, because in a way, the center has proposed a bunch of things. Unfortunately, many of these things have to be disposed at the state level, particularly when it comes to land, labor, environmental approvals, and so on and so forth. The speed there at times could be leaving a lot to be desired, if I may. So I think the coordination has to be of a very different magnitude. Ease of doing business has to be a big focus, and hopefully what got announced in the budget will, the committee which has been formed, hopefully that will take care of that. I think I'd like to talk about two specific things, can't specifically talk about Ladli Behna, but let me just say, again, the involvement of women in the workforce. And Mathew just spoke about his example, and I think that's a brilliant example. Simply because if we have more and more of our women into the workforce, just imagine the impact that it has on GDP, for instance. And I think that could be of a very significant magnitude. In fact, Namita spoke about sustainability. Let me say that many of the sustainability startups, and this is on record, many of the sustainability startups have indeed been initiated by women. Yes. In fact, not only that, most of the sustainability investment funds also are being run by women, by the way. So I think, I think if you just look at it, if we can get greater involvement, and it is a wonderful agenda, politically, socially, economically. And those are the three axes on which I've always been told that you should make any recommendations. So all the recommendations that we make are on those three axes, and it fits in very, very well. So to my mind, I think involvement of more and more women into the workforce will certainly help. And the last thing that I would say is that, when we talk about states and centers, etc., we need to also be, I think what hurts me a little bit is this divide between, certain regions of the country being more developed than the others. Okay. And I think that's an area which requires significant incremental focus, because unless there is inclusive development right across India, there could be social issues that might crop up, which might impair India's image in the minds of foreign investors and others as we look into the out years.
Just to add a line, one of the best wealth creators in corporate India is Thermax, run by two ladies here. And I think it was listed in 1996. And it would be a nice 30-35% CAGR over the last 25 years. Yes. Let's, Mathew, get to this part where we've digitized our markets. And as you would know, 35 years ago, we used to physically go into an exchange and trade securities. Now everything is done on a mobile phone. So basically, creating wealth or actually making it work for you has become easier. Has it also got a flip side? When there is so much of trading, so much of quick investments that are happening, which possibly jeopardize long-term wealth creation.
Absolutely. I think public markets are a very treacherous animal, right? So, I have my own personal experience where I feel, the only thing that works is longer term investing. And I have also tried multiple times trying to figure out various strategies. I think despite, a lot of effort, I think you're actually battling, supercomputers and algos, which takes away, combined with significant volatility, takes away a lot of the money from the market. And who pays for it? It's people who are on the other side, right? So I think, having said that, I think Indian population, and I'm talking about particularly in the western part of India, maybe true of other markets as well, people have the tendency to be an active participant in the market. It is that little bit of that, I wouldn't call it gambling, that desire for action. And, maybe it's a little bit of that get quick rich type approach. So I think it is something I think, eventually takes away a lot of the value creation for retail markets and true of even high net worth as well.
So what advice would you give to a lot of these newbie retailers who are coming into the market over the last 2.5 years to create wealth such as yours? What to do, what not to do?
So I think my point on this is from a retailer's perspective, or rather retail investor's perspective. I think investing is a longer term game. Learning investing is more important than actively participating. So the opportunity to, because investing is, if you are starting out at 25, you have a 40, 50 year ahead of you. Your opportunity to be in the market and not to be out of market, right? So doing research, learning, taking measured steps, I think is probably a better approach, and building it brick by brick, which is sometimes not very exciting, but that's what I think people should focus on. And I think I'm not against direct investing, right? I think while it is great, people would say mutual funds are experts and you should go through that. I mean, that should be, when you're starting out, maybe 80-90% should be that. But it's good to have, it's part of your life, right? Yes. Investing is, I'm talking about an average person, right? If you're a middle income or even a low to middle income, that's a thing that adds value, because most of the people, their cash flows are just enough to survive through their regular life, right? So keeping some money away and building that nest egg is something important, and having some exposure and knowledge of direct investing is something that people should have. I just want to add one point, Sanjeev, on the Ladli Ben. Again, I don't want to say anything controversial, but I see states doing it differently, right? There are a set of states, and I come from Kerala, and we have had a Marxist government for several years. The exceptional investment they have done in three things: education. Kerala public schools are so good that a lot of people actually send their children to public school. This is something that started only in the last 10-15 years. And the hospitals are exceptional. The quality of hospital at the cost at which it is delivered is exceptional. And obviously the other thing Kerala government has done very well is poverty elimination. Kerala is one of the few states. So I think what is happening probably in the northern states, and I don't know whether it is about just handing out money to get votes. I think it's more than that. They get so overwhelmed, they're not able to take that money and really execute for the population. If you really take a 10-15 year view, that would create capacity, that would create infrastructure, rather than just giving out money, because you're giving out money to a lot of people. The requirements is very different. You may be giving money to somebody who has a 100,000 income or maybe 50,000 income. In the way these things are administered, if you have taken that money and created the capacity and kind of built, basic, which is healthcare, education, and some supplementing, food, I think that would have been a much better way to implement. And I think the reason why they are not doing it, they're probably overwhelmed to do it. This is just my hypothesis.
Namita, the final word to you. This is the third term of the present government at the center. Two things that you would expect them to do over the next 3-4 years as far as prosperity and spreading it across India is concerned.
I think the one thing, again, from a pharma perspective, is sometimes there tends to be over-regulation in certain sectors, and I don't think that's always good for the long term. There are also some policy flip-flops. Sometimes an incentive is given and then it's taken away. I mean, if you see the other countries, when an incentive is given, it's kept long-term so that it can have that impact. You can't have a short-term incentive, you can't have policy flip-flops, you can't have over-regulation. And Sanjeev was absolutely right in what he said about ease of doing business. There's many challenges. Especially I have about 70 companies now in my portfolio, Shark Tank. I see the kind of issues they bring to me from a legal regulatory standpoint. It's not easy. I mean, we're a certain scale. Emcure now is a very large company. So we have processes and systems in place. But for the ones who are just starting up, it's not easy. So I think a lot more needs to be done in terms of making the ease of business better, not over-regulating, keeping a more long-term outlook, not flip-flopping on policies. If we can really crack that, I think that'll be fabulous. Secondly, for the GDP really to grow at the rate we want, the mix in terms of manufacturing becoming a higher part of the product mix is very important. So yes, PLI has been successful, but I don't think it's reached the level in terms of numbers that we all had expected. So in execution, a lot more needs to be done to get to that, manufacturing being a higher percent of the mix. And then finally, you need a lot more risk capital and public-private partnership from the, between the government and industry. Because the gaps we see between patients and hospital beds, number of nurses coming out, doctors coming out. I mean, I'm talking pharma specific because that's my domain expertise, but there are a lot of gaps, and these can only be taken care of if there's private and public partnership. It's not to the extent that you see globally. So I think these are just 2 or 3 top of the mind things we can work on.
Thank you. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for the panel.